The Crusades were a series of military campaigns during the Middle Ages that pitted European Christians against Islamic forces in or near Jerusalem and the Christian holy places in Palestine. The various intermittent crusades lasted from 1087 to 1291, with the Christians failing to secure Jerusalem. At least 16 individuals received readings from Edgar Cayce that indicated past lives in France during the period of the Crusades. None of the individuals were famous historical figures. These cases can be broadly grouped as those who left France on crusade and those who stayed at home, or more precisely, in most cases, were left at home or simply abandoned. Within that first group of those who traveled to Palestine to fight the Muslims, we find a common pattern of change of heart and mind, wherein crusade did not turn out to be what they expected, and that applies especially to their attitudes toward their Muslim enemies. For example, a reading for a 48-year-old man described a past life in France as Charléon. Charléon was a zealot for holy war when he headed out on crusade. He felt that all men should be impelled to go under one rule, if not by persuasion, then by coercion. When he was taken prisoner by what he regarded to be his heathen enemies, he had a change of heart and mind when the Muslims, through their kindness, made him a zealot in the opposite direction. Many of his fellow Crusaders considered him to be a turncoat, or one who changed their allegiance for selfish reasons. Yet Charléon gained in the latter portion of that sojourn through the realization that truly all force, all power of a spiritual or mental nature emanates from one source. He carried over into his modern life a strong commitment to the spiritual side of life. A reading for a 54-year-old woman described a past life as Jean Batelli, a French man who fought in the Crusades. As with many during that experience, Jean Batelli undertook crusade as an idea rather than an ideal. He didn't even make it to the Holy Land, being injured and captured by Muslims in what is now Turkey. But when the enemies that he had sworn to destroy healed his body and released him from captivity, he returned home a changed man, living in the southern region of France near what is today Caen. He had learned the meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. From that French lifetime was carried over an innate psychic ability that could be aroused, yet the reading insisted that the entity was constantly meeting itself and must use that ability for good. In another case involving switched gender, a reading for a 36-year-old woman described a similar pattern in which she had lived in France as a man during the Crusades. In the name Marcellus de Withena, he came to realize that the enemy was not a heathen, but just as close to God, only with a different approach. Confusion arose during the Crusade venture when Marcellus came to know a Muslim as a friend and brother in spirit. From that crusade experience, Marcellus changed his attitude, and at a soul level, he determined within himself that he would never incarnate as a man again. The entity lost and gained in that past life, initially losing in the attempt to trust in material things, but then gaining through the realization of the oneness of all force. The role of gender in the Crusades finds a curious twist in a reading for a 51-year-old female missionary who was told that she had lived in France as Maria Fachouan during the Second Crusade. When her husband chose to go to the Holy Land, her desire for his companionship and perhaps her own convictions about the virtue of crusade was so great that she posed as a man so that she could be with him and be part of the holy war. Her reading notes that she experienced hardships, but gained in self-control and remained true to her ideals and marital relationship. Perhaps part of her motivation for going on crusade was to avoid the difficulties and suffering of the women who were left at home, in a very distressing situation, as we shall see in some of the cases that follow. For example, a reading for a 55-year-old woman described a past life in France as a man named Schmelenzar. After participating in Crusade, Schmelenzar was aware of his mistake with regard to the heathen lawbreakers that he had gone to conquer, for the Muslims had shown him kindness. We have seen this pattern before, but there is another dimension in this case. Schmelenzar had taken precautions with his companion before leaving on crusade that were not consistent with his ideal. Based on several readings that describe these precautions, it is obvious that Schmelenzar had left his companion confined in a chastity belt, a contraption intended to ensure the sexual faithfulness of a woman during the man's absence. Chastity belts, although probably not known by that name during the Crusades, were likely made of cloth and leather with a metal lock and key. Although numerous medieval stories mention the use of these devices, no actual physical evidence of their existence has been found in the graves of the women of that era, leading some scholars to doubt that they were even used during the Crusades. Yet we find several such cases in the readings. Apparently, compliance with the device was usually enforced by the Crusaders' family. Thus, in addition to the physical discomfort and emotional shame, there were also interpersonal consequences of such precautions. For example, a reading for a 54-year-old woman described a past life as Marebeuin, living near to what is now the Bordeaux region of France during the Crusades, when so many went to the Holy Land to drive out the infidels. Marebeuin experienced much turmoil and strife when she was left at home, confined in a chastity belt that brought not only shame to the body, but mental doubts as to the character of men who would boast of spirituality and yet would leave their loved ones in such a manner. She gained through the experience in learning patience, but did carry over into her modern incarnation some greater lessons yet to be learned from that sad French incarnation. In the question and answer section of her reading, she asked why she had been so fearful in early childhood, especially of animals, spiders, and sharp knives, for even as an adult she disliked to use or even see a sharp knife. Her reading stated that those feelings came from the French experience, when she was bound about by her associates to maintain her virtue. There was the use of knives and torture racks all around her during that period. Apparently, in order to be fitted with the device, she had to go to the local prison, where those in charge had the necessary skill set to make the contraption, an experience that would have been not only humiliating, but even terrifying if she had witnessed the torture of prisoners in that dreadful environment. A reading for a 41-year-old housewife described a similar reincarnation scenario when she lived as Suzanne Marcelieu in France. Doubted by her companion who left on crusade, she was forced to wear a chastity belt to prevent her from having sexual relations. This brought disturbing conditions of many natures, and the determination that she would sometime, somewhere, be free and get even. Her reading noted that she carried over these issues into her modern incarnation, which were only the meeting of self. The background information for the reading indicates that she had been married for 18 years to an impotent man, her Crusader companion in that French past life. And although attempting sexual abstinence at times, she was currently engaged in an affair with a married man. She was suffering physical problems due to the breaking of peripheral blood vessels in her legs. There is much more to this story, but you get the picture. From a soul development standpoint, she was sincerely trying to meet her karma, and some progress was noted in the 3 readings that she obtained from Edgar Cayce. A reading for a 38-year-old secretary described a past life in France as Marcia Flecheux. During the Crusades, she had been left alone by her companion, who took precautions confining her in a chastity belt. This brought hardships, fears, and doubts about relations with men that carried over into her modern life, in which she questioned favors and harbored doubts, raising questions about closer relationships. In her French incarnation, with the return of her companion and freedom from the belt, there was no home building, only dealing with matters of the world, for she would do anything else rather than be associated with him. A reading for a 59-year-old woman described a past life in France as René Schwalder. Her husband had been zealous in his pursuit of ideas and ideals as he went on crusade. But he was overzealous in taking precautions to prevent indiscretions by his wife. He even left an overzealous maid in charge of enforcing compliance with the chastity belt, bringing much anxiety and trouble, wreaking vengeance within René's own self and outwardly toward others. Her reading warned her about the law regarding vengeance. Vengeance is best left to God if one is to have peace within and freedom from anxiety and worry. A reading for a 39-year-old woman described a past life in the region along what is now the northern border of France with Germany. I'm not even going to try to pronounce her name in that incarnation, which obviously indicates a German origin, but will simply note that she gained in that experience as one who assisted other women who were left at home by their crusading companions. Her reading was discreet in describing the exact nature of her assistance, stating that she helped those women folk who were distrusted by men and suffered bodily persecution through the various characters of enthrallments, another polite reference to the precautions taken, in other words, chastity belts of one form or other. The assistance provided by this woman included counseling, and what we would now call support groups for their own preservation. She brought redemption to not only the women in her family, but to all women she encountered in that experience. In her modern incarnation, the theme of women's liberation was carried over as the belief and practice of the independence of women in their relationships with other women and men, yet in the spirit of cooperation that makes for the best for all. In another case of women's liberation during the Crusades, a reading for a 61-year-old housewife and civic leader described a past life as Flaune Richelieu, who lived in the south of France near the border with Spain. Her reading notes that in her region, one of the outcomes of the Crusades was the later separation of church and state. Certainly the Holy Wars did illustrate the problems that can arise when religion and politics are combined. But the really important influence in the experience of Flaune Richelieu was the progress made in her region with regard to women's freedom, as well as the ability for individuals to confidently manage their own personal affairs and relationships. Apparently, having the men away at war provided an opportunity for women to take charge and be responsible for their lives. The reading also notes that the community in her area drew together in unity and support of each other, perhaps somewhat like we noted in the previous case of women's liberation along the northern border of France during the Crusades. Our final case in this section is based on a reading for a 34-year-old osteopathic physician that described a past life as Penuel. Being young in years as others left for the Holy Wars, Penuel remained in France in the town of Neuilly, becoming more and more a materialist as a merchant and practitioner of the healing arts of that time. In addition to selling medicinal remedies, he performed bleeding as a healing modality, all the while pondering spiritual understandings and material relationships. His reading noted that he carried over into his modern life an innate urge to be a bone surgeon. In addition to whatever spiritual gain he had in that past life while operating his medieval medical business, he also lost in the turmoils that arose during that experience, as in many of the cases that we have reviewed in this section. So as we conclude our reincarnational survey of past lives of French Crusaders and their associates, we may feel some resonance with modern times, not only for the individuals who participated in the world wars of Cayce's era, but in our own time of seemingly constant warfare, often carried on in the name of religion by overzealous extremists on either side of every conflict. And of course there are those left at home to make do as best they can in difficult times, making progress in soul development, meeting themselves in the midst of life. We resume the theme of religion and warfare in the next section in the story of Joan of Arc, a spiritual warrior on a mission from God. Or so she said.